The city lights of New York shimmered against the glass windows of La Verité, one of the most prestigious fine dining restaurants in Manhattan. It was a place where celebrities, CEOs, and socialites gathered to indulge in extravagant meals while basking in the exclusivity of their surroundings. The scent of aged wine and truffle-infused dishes filled the air, mingling with the soft hum of classical music playing in the background. As the revolving doors spun, a tall, middle-aged man stepped inside. Michael Carter, a name once known across Silicon Valley, had built an empire in the tech world before retiring early to focus on investments and philanthropy. But tonight, he was just another patron, dressed in a simple grey hoodie, worn-out jeans and a pair of old sneakers. His presence went unnoticed at first, but that changed the moment he approached the hostess stand. Behind the podium stood Sophia Reynolds, a senior waitress with 5 years of experience at La Verité. Her posture was upright, her uniform crisp, and her expression carefully composed. She had seen countless customers walk through these doors, but she had also learned to judge people quickly. To her, appearance spoke louder than words, and, right now, the man standing before her looked completely out of place. Sophia's professional smile barely concealed the flicker of disdain in her eyes. She took a slow glance at Michael's attire before responding in a tone laced with subtle condescension. "Good evening, sir. Are you sure you're looking for La Verité?" Michael, unbothered by the question, returned a polite smile. "Yes, I'd like to get a table for one, if you have availability." Sophia hesitated, suppressing an amused smirk. He can't be serious, she thought. A man in worn-out clothes, asking for a table at one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city. "This is a high-expen dining place," she remarked, glancing at him again. "Each plate starts at $150. The subtle message was clear. Are you sure you belong here?" Michael met her gaze with the same calm expression. "That's fine. I'd still like a table." Sophia sighed internally, but kept her poised demeanor. "Of course, sir, right this way," she said, deliberately selecting a less desirable table near the kitchen, where the noise of clattering dishes and the occasional scent of cooking oil lingered in the air. She gestured toward the seat with a forced smile. "This should be a comfortable spot for you." Michael sat down without hesitation, his face unreadable. Around him a few guests had begun to take notice. Some whispered, others stole discreet glances. As Sophia handed him the menu, she couldn't resist adding one final remark. "Let me know if you need any recommendations, or if you'd like to see the prices first." Michael simply nodded, offering nothing but a quiet, knowing smile. The evening was just beginning, but the lesson was already in motion. Michael Carter sat comfortably at the small table near the kitchen, unfazed by the clatter of dishes and the occasional burst of conversation from the restaurant staff. He took his time scanning the menu, flipping through the pages with deliberate ease. Despite the intentional placement by Sophia, he showed no sign of discomfort. Across the restaurant, Sophia Reynolds watched him carefully, her lips pressed into a thin line. She had seen many people try to fake it in upscale establishments before, tourists or hopefuls who wanted to experience luxury beyond their means. In her mind, Michael was just another one of them. Before taking his order, she made sure to delay attending to his table, tending instead to a well-dressed couple seated at the center of the dining area. She flashed them a warm smile, her voice dripping with charm as she recommended their finest vintage wine. The couple nodded in approval, completely unaware of the subtle game she was playing. Satisfied that Michael had waited long enough, she finally returned to his table, picking up a notepad and pen with exaggerated professionalism. "Sir, have you decided, sir?" she asked, her tone neutral but with an unmistakable undertone of skepticism. Michael glanced up at her, his expression unreadable. "Yes. I'll have the filet mignon, Rossini, please." Sophia almost laughed. Of course, he picked the most expensive dish on the menu, "A filet mignon Rossini," she repeated, feigning surprise. "That's one of our finest dishes. It's $350. Just making sure you're aware." Michael remained calm, nodding as he handed her the menu. "That sounds perfect. And a glass of your best red wine as well." Her grip on the notepad tightened slightly. She had expected hesitation, maybe even embarrassment, but there was none. If anything, Michael looked completely at ease. Sophia scribbled down the order and turned away, but as she walked back toward the kitchen, she leaned toward one of her colleagues, Jake, and whispered, "He ordered the most expensive thing on the menu. Let's see if he sticks around for the bill." Jake, a kinder and more observant server, gave her a disapproving look, but said nothing. Meanwhile, at a nearby table, James and Linda Thompson, an elderly couple, had been quietly observing the interaction. Linda sighed, shaking her head. "She's treating him terribly, James. Did you see the way she spoke to him?" James, a man of few words, took a sip of his wine and nodded. "It's not the first time I've seen something like this. But he's handling it well. Let's see how this plays out." Sophia, unaware that her actions were being watched, continued to serve the other tables, all while keeping an eye on Michael, waiting for him to break under the pressure. But Michael remained patient. He was waiting too, but for something far greater. The evening at La Verité continued in its usual rhythm, soft music playing in the background, waiters gliding between tables, and guests enjoying their carefully plated meals. But at one particular table near the kitchen, tension was quietly building. Michael Carter remained seated, calm and composed, as he waited for his meal. Around him, the air of exclusivity was almost palpable. Waiters attending to finely dressed patrons, sommeliers pouring expensive wines, and conversations filled with business deals and extravagant vacations. Yet, despite the sophisticated ambience, Sophia Reynolds was determined to make sure Michael felt out of place. She approached his table again, this time with a smirk barely hidden behind her professional demeanor. Holding the menu in one hand, she tilted her head slightly and spoke loud enough for nearby diners to hear. "Just to confirm, sir, you're ordering the filet mignon Rossini? That's $350. I wouldn't want there to be any surprises when the check arrives." A few guests turned their heads at the remark, their interest piqued. Some exchanged amused glances, while others, like Lisa Parker, frowned in silent disapproval. Michael, however, remained unaffected. He met Sophia's gaze with a slight nod. "Yes, I'd like to try it." Sophia arched an eyebrow as if she was waiting for him to reconsider. When he didn't, she let out a small, amused breath and scribbled down the order. "Of course, and how would you like it cooked?" "Medium rare, please." "Excellent choice," she replied, her tone dripping with sarcasm. As she turned on her heel, she made no effort to lower her voice as she whispered to a nearby waiter, "Jake, I bet he's just here to show off. People like that always pretend until it's time to pay." Jake, who had been silently observing her behavior all night, shifted uncomfortably. He glanced at Michael, who was now calmly sipping his water, seemingly unbothered by the whispering around him. At a nearby table, James and Linda Thompson, the elderly couple who had been watching, exchanged looks. "This is getting uncomfortable," Linda murmured. James nodded, his eyes never leaving Michael. "I don't think he's the one who should be uncomfortable." Meanwhile, at another table, Lisa Parker leaned closer to her friend. "She's being unbelievably rude. He hasn't done anything to deserve this." Her friend sighed. "Some people assume too much based on appearances, but I have a feeling she's messing with the wrong person." Sophia, still convinced that Michael was nothing more than a misplaced guest, continued her evening, confident that the real spectacle would come when the check arrived. But what she didn't know was that the lesson she thought she was teaching would soon be reversed. On her, Michael Carter remained seated, his posture relaxed, his expression unreadable. Despite the thinly veiled insults and the deliberate attempts to undermine him, he showed no signs of irritation or discomfort. He simply waited. Sophia Reynolds, on the other hand, grew more impatient. She had expected some sort of reaction, maybe embarrassment, maybe frustration, but Michael remained unbothered. That, more than anything, irritated her. Determined to make him feel unwelcome, she intentionally delayed his order, prioritizing other tables with guests who, in her mind, truly belonged at La Verité. She glided from one table to another, laughing warmly with well-dressed patrons, making recommendations, ensuring that wine glasses were never empty, but every time she walked past Michael's table, she pretended not to notice him. At a nearby table, James and Linda Thompson continued to watch with growing concern. "She's completely ignoring him now," Linda whispered, shaking her head. James exhaled sharply. "She's trying to make him uncomfortable, but I don't think it's working." Meanwhile, Lisa Parker, sitting a few tables away, grew increasingly frustrated. She had been observing the situation since the moment Michael walked in, and it was clear to her that Sophia was going out of her way to treat him poorly. "This is getting ridiculous," Lisa muttered to her friend. "He's been sitting there for over 20 minutes, and she hasn't even brought his drink." Her friend nodded, watching as Sophia once again bypassed Michael's table without stopping. But Michael, he simply waited. He didn't wave down another server, he didn't complain. His patience was deliberate, almost strategic. A quiet resistance against the very prejudice Safi was trying to impose on him. Behind the service counter, Jake, one of the restaurant's junior waiters, had also taken notice. He turned to Sophia, keeping his voice low. "Are you planning to serve him at all?" he asked, frowning. Sophia let out a soft scoff. "I'll get to him when I have time. Besides, let's be real. He's probably not going to stay long." Jake's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. As the minutes ticked by, the atmosphere in the restaurant began to shift. More and more guests took notice of what was happening. Some exchanged knowing glances, others whispered in hushed tones. Even the staff started to sense the tension in the air. And yet, Michael remained calm. His silence was not weakness. It was control. What Sophia didn't realize was that, by trying to humiliate him, she had unknowingly placed herself under the spotlight. And soon the entire restaurant would see exactly who she was. The energy inside La Verité shifted. The once elegant and sophisticated atmosphere was now tainted by the underlying tension radiating from one corner of the restaurant. Though no one spoke outright, the silent whispers and exchanged glances between guests indicated that many had taken notice of what was happening. Michael Carter remained composed, his demeanor unchanged, as he sat patiently at his neglected table. It had been nearly 30 minutes since he placed his order, and yet there was still no sign of his meal or even the wine he had requested. Across the room, Lisa Parker set down her glass of water, exhaling sharply. "This is getting absurd. He's being ignored on purpose, and no one is saying anything." Her friend hesitated before responding. "Maybe he doesn't want to cause a scene." Lisa's jaw tightened. "That doesn't mean this is okay." Meanwhile, at another table, James and Linda Thompson continued observing. "I think it's time someone intervened," Lyndon murmured, watching as Sophia Reynolds continued to dote on wealthier patrons while completely dismissing Michael. Just then, the restaurant manager, David Wallace, emerged from the back office. With an air of authority, he walked toward the center of the restaurant, scanning the floor. He paused when he spotted Michael, sitting alone at his dimly lit table. A brief frown crossed his face before realization struck. David's expression shifted instantly. Without hesitation, he strode toward Michael's table, his sudden movement drawing the attention of several guests. When he reached Michael, his voice carried across the quiet room. "Mr. Carter, I had no idea you were dining with us tonight. Welcome. It's truly an honor to have you here." A stunned silence fell over the restaurant. Sophia, who had just been chatting with another customer, froze mid-sentence. Her eyes darted toward Michael, her face instantly paling. Lisa's eyebrows shot up in surprise. Wait, did he just say Carter? As in Michael Carter? Her friend's mouth hung open. The billionaire tech investor? Across the room, whispers erupted like a ripple effect. The realization spread quickly. This wasn't just some random diner. Michael Carter was one of the most respected business figures in the country, known for his contributions to technology and philanthropy. Sophia's heart pounded in her chest as she pieced everything together. The man she had dismissed, humiliated and deliberately ignored, was not only someone who could afford to dine here, but someone who probably had more influence than anyone in the restaurant. Michael, still unfazed, gave David a polite nod. "Thank you, David. I just wanted to enjoy a quiet dinner." David turned towards Sophia, his gaze sharp. The weight of the moment was suffocating. And just like that, the power dynamic shifted. Not because Michael had demanded respect, but because the truth had spoken for itself. A heavy silence settled over La Verité. Every eye in the restaurant was now locked onto Michael Carter, the man who had been dismissed and ignored all evening, yet turned out to be one of the most influential figures in the country. Sophia Reynolds stood frozen, her mind racing. The weight of her mistake crashed down on her, suffocating and inescapable. She had spent the entire evening treating Michael like an outsider, only to now realize that he was not just a guest who could afford to be here. He was someone who could have bought the entire restaurant if he wanted to. David Wallace, the restaurant manager, turned to Sophia, his voice sharp but controlled. "Is there a reason Mr. Carter has been waiting over 30 minutes for his meal?" Sophia's throat went dry. She wanted to speak, to come up with an excuse, but she knew there was none that could justify what she had done. Before she could find the words, Michael finally spoke. His voice was calm, yet it carried an unmistakable weight. "Sophia," he said, addressing her directly for the first time that evening. Her breath caught in her throat. "Do you think respect should be given only to those who look like they belong?" The question hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Sophia's lips parted, but no words came out. She had spent the night making judgments about him based on his appearance, and now she had to face the reality of her actions in front of an entire room of witnesses. Michael didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His presence alone commanded attention. "It shouldn't take recognizing someone's name to treat them with dignity," he continued, his gaze unwavering. "Everyone who walks through these doors deserves to be treated with the same level of respect." A few guests nodded in silent agreement. Lisa Parker, who had been watching everything unfold, whispered to her friend, "He's handling this with so much grace, she should be embarrassed." At a nearby table, James and Linda Thompson exchanged glances. "I think she's learning a lesson she won't forget," James murmured. Sophia, overwhelmed with shame, lowered her head. She could feel the judgmental stares from other diners burning into her, but more than that, she felt the crushing weight of disappointment in herself. David took a deep breath before speaking. "Mr. Carter, I sincerely apologize for this unacceptable treatment. I assure you, this is not what we stand for." Michael gave a small nod, his expression unreadable. "Mistakes happen," he said simply. "But what matters is how we learn from them." Sophia swallowed hard. She knew this night would follow her for a long time, and she knew she would never forget it. The tension inside La Verité had shifted. What had once been an atmosphere of silent judgment had now turned into one of deep reflection. Conversations had quieted, and many diners sat in their seats, processing what had just unfolded before them. Michael Carter, still composed, finally picked up his fork and knife and began eating. Despite the weight of the moment, he acted as though nothing extraordinary had happened. But the lesson had been delivered, and it was one no one in that room would soon forget. Sophia Reynolds, however, was not so fortunate. She remained near the service counter, her hands gripping the edge of the polished wood, her mind replaying every moment of the night. The humiliation, the realization, the regret. All of it settled into her chest like a heavy stone. The restaurant manager, David Wallace, turned to her, his voice lower but firm. "We'll have a discussion after service, Sophia, but for now I suggest you take a moment to reflect on what just happened." Sophia swallowed hard and nodded. For the first time in years she felt completely out of control, not over others, but over herself. Meanwhile, at a nearby table, James and Linda Thompson exchanged knowing glances. "I've seen a lot in my time," James murmured, taking a sip of his wine, "but I've never seen a lesson delivered quite like that." Linda nodded. Sometimes the most powerful statements don't need to be shouted. Across the room, Lisa Parker felt a deep sense of satisfaction. She turned to her friend. "Nith was one of the classiest takedowns I've ever seen. He didn't need to yell or make a scene. He just let the truth speak for itself." Her friend nodded, still in quiet awe. "And she'll remember this forever." As the last few bites of his meal disappeared, Michael set down his utensils and wiped his mouth with a napkin. He looked up at David. "I'd like to have a quick word with the staff before I leave." David nodded immediately. "Of course, Mr. Carter." A few minutes later, the restaurant staff gathered in the back room. Michael stood in the center, his expression neither angry nor smug, just focused. "Everyone makes mistakes," he began, his voice steady. "But what defines us is how we learn from them." His eyes met Sophia's, but not in condemnation. "This isn't about punishment, it's about growth. A restaurant isn't just about food or service, it's about how you make people feel. That is what people remember." Sophia's eyes glistened with unspoken emotion, and she gave a small nod. As Michael left La Verité that night, the lesson he had imparted did not stay within the walls of the restaurant. It walked out with every single person who had witnessed it. And it would stay with them for a long, long time. The events that unfolded at La Verité were more than just an uncomfortable dining experience. They were a reflection of a much larger issue in society. Prejudice, quick judgment, and the failure to treat people with basic human decency are problems that exist everywhere. Not just in restaurants. Michael Carter never needed to demand respect. His actions, his composure, and his quiet confidence were enough to expose the truth. Respect should never be conditional on appearances, wealth, or status. This story teaches us several crucial lessons. True character is revealed in how we treat others. It's easy to be kind to people when we think they are important, but the real test of character is how we treat those who don't seem to belong. Power is not always in speaking louder, but in speaking wisely. Michael never raised his voice, never argued, yet his presence and words carried more weight than any confrontation ever could. Our biases can betray us. Sophia believed she was in control, but in the end, her own prejudices led her to humiliation. It was never Michael who needed to prove himself. It was her. This isn't just a lesson for one waitress or one restaurant. It's a reminder for all of us. How often do we judge someone too quickly? How many times do we let appearances dictate our perceptions? The truth is, respect, kindness, and dignity should be the default, not a privilege reserved for a select few. What do you think? Have you ever witnessed or experienced a moment like this, where someone was judged unfairly based on appearances? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more real-life lessons that challenge the way we see the world. Together, we can create conversations that lead to change.